Well, hey there, you're on the internet. My weird week just got weirder. And welcome to the Triple N Network, where all you newbie nib nerds can find all the news you'll need. Let's look at an ink today, shall we? Now, today's ink is by a Polish company called K.W.Z. And the wonderful, original, mysterious benefactor ordered me all of their inks in sample form. And one of the things that K.W.Z as a brand is famous for is making a lot of Iron-Gall inks. And if you'd like to know more about Iron-Gall, please look up my video, K.W.Z Iron-Gall Gold, I believe it was. In that I have more information about what Iron-Gall is, how it works, things like that, as well as educational links. The link to that video will either be in the K.W.Z playlist, which may show up in the bar to the side, or it may just show up Iron-Gall Gold. But yeah, let's look at today's Iron-Gall, which is blue number 4. And I believe there are 6 Iron-Gall blues, plus a blue-black and a turquoise, and yeah, they got a lot of Iron-Galls. I picked this one because, as you might be able to see from the label, there's not a lot of blue in that. Now, granted, most Iron-Gall inks go on blue, and then as they dry they get more gray, but this one, you might be able to see in the vial, there's not a lot of blue in there either. So, thought I'd try it out. So, let's start with the pens. These are the 2 pens I use. This one is a Nemosine, I have no idea. It's a 0.6 stub, so it's a fairly small stub, and you might be able to see, you can't see through those tines. They are pretty tightly jammed together. So generally this is a fairly dry writing nib. And then I also have this JinHao X450, and I love my X450s because they tend to be pretty broad and pretty wet, and this one definitely is. So, a bit of a range there. Now, I wanted to try and find some comparable samples. I didn't have the best of luck, and a lot of these are comparable by color but not necessarily performance, because Iron-Gall inks are known for having outstanding water resistance. So now this one is Mont Blanc's Midnight Blue, but it's an old formula, and admittedly it's in cartridges. And so I'm not sure if the cartridges were ever Iron-Gall, but I know that the old bottle formula was Iron-Gall. So you can see there's a bit more blue here. This is almost a bit more purple. Here's another Iron-Gall, actually. This is Chesterfield or Diamine's Archival Vault, or Registrar's ink when it's in the original Diamine bottle. Here, it actually does look much more blue. Again, this one's a bit more purple. K.W.Z Iron-Gall number 1. Blue number 1. Here, much more blue. And darker in some spots, but yeah. And then I thought I'd also include a K.W.Z gray that's supposed to be gray. So this is Gray Luxe. Yeah, this one's, it's really gray. It's a really gray blue. But yeah, so let's check out the chromatographies, and I actually have several, and I will explain. Now, Iron-Gall inks, it's complicated. I really recommend you find my Iron-Gall Gold video because I explain it a lot better, but essentially it needs to bond with the cellulose fiber. So here, although this is a very waterproof ink, there isn't a lot of, there's a lot of movement. But you can see where the drop was initially put, and then there's some pretty solid gray. I was going to say color, but gray isn't really a color, is it? And then you get this hazy sort of like creamy color up at the top. Here's where I let it dry, by which I mean how long it took for this strip to dry. You can see the dot got a bit darker, and the cream over the top is just as visible. Now, here's where I let the chromatography slip dry for 24 hours. Big difference, right? This is much darker. And yet there's still a steady haze and still a cream over the top, but yeah, it takes time for it to bond. Something to be aware of, because these tests, I only gave them maybe like 20 minutes to half an hour to dry, and look what the difference is when you give them like a day. So yeah, something to keep in mind. Consider this worst case scenario. I wanted to see what this ink could sort of stand up to. So this patch right here is just water. And again, I think this was dry maybe 10 minutes, but yeah, you can see some of it left, but where it's heaviest, it still remains. 1/3 bleach solution. Now bleach is an oxidizer, so essentially it would like force the reaction, which is why some parts of it are extremely dark. Ammonia, kind of similar. Hydrogen peroxide, I honestly don't know how to describe that, so I'll just leave that there. Alright, now, paper test. Top down in density, Clairefontaine, 90 grams per square meter. Now, I shall attempt to hold this still so you can get a look, but I am ridiculously caffeinated. Yeah. Again, you know, it's really gray. It's really gray with hints of purple, but it's kind of nice, and I hope this will show up. See that? You see how it's kind of shiny, especially in the darkest areas? That's the thing this ink is going to do, so just keep an eye on that. Now, Iron-Gall inks are pretty dense. They've literally got iron in them, and so it can take a while for them to dry, which is kind of the case. That 0.6 stub took 11 seconds. That fairly broad and wet JinHao took 26, and you can see the smear went right off the page. But there is very nice shading in the writing as well as in the scrubby. It's very distinct, so if you like that, that's rather nice. And most Iron-Galls tend to be a little dry writing, so I was expecting to have to fight with it to get it to come out of that stub, but actually this one is mildly wet, which is not all that common, because again, there's iron in this ink. Sometimes it can be hard to get it to move. But yeah, I was actually kind of surprised by that, and I personally prefer wetter ink, so that was nice for me. There's no bleed, no feather, no spread, no echo, and I say there's no sheen, but there is the shiny stuff, so I don't know, sheen, when I think of sheen, I generally think of contrasting colors. This isn't, it's just kind of shiny, so I don't know. Now here, you can vaguely make out, sorry, so you don't have to look at my band-aids. You can vaguely make out where that water drop was, but still you can see every single little line. And as for this water test, it did get a little lighter, but look at how clear that is. That is absolutely readable, that is absolutely recoverable. You could definitely recover that if you wanted to. And what's interesting is it makes it take on a look of almost like a pencil. So I thought that was kind of cool. Next up is Fabriano Eco Qua. It's an 85 gram per square meter paper. Personally, I love it. It has very quickly become probably my favorite paper to use. And again, on here, great shading. Just great shading. I mean, look at the shading in the X450. And then in the scrubbies, and again, we get some like shine in the wettest parts, which is just interesting. Now, that 0.6 stub took 12 seconds. The broad and wet JinHao took 27. But again, I mean, well, if you haven't seen that video, I should say that, I mean, Iron-Galls take a while to dry. Pretty much any dense ink does, but these in particular. Now, very well behaved, you know, no bleed, no feather, no spread, no echo. Again, I'm not sure if I should call this shininess sheen, but yeah, it doesn't dry on the nib very quickly, which the odd Iron-Gall ink can, but really wasn't a problem with this. Again, really kind of like that wet flow, which is unusual for an Iron-Gall. Again, here you can only vaguely make out where that water test was. You see right there? The bottom, it's a little darker. And again, this water test, the writing is absolutely recoverable. It's very clear, very there. You can still see some of the shading. Again, kind of has like a pencil texture to it. Next up is Rhodia, 80 grams per square meter, where again, we get some very nice shading. I hope this will come through in the writing and in the scrubby. You almost get a halo effect in that bottom scrubby. And again, you get like a shininess. So yeah, I still don't know if that's sheen. But again, look, that's generally a dry writing stub. And it's got an Iron-Gall ink in it. That's nice. Honestly, to not have to fight with that pen, that's nice. Speaking of, that 0.6 stub took 11 seconds to dry. The broad and wet JinHao took 25. And as I say here, for a gray ink, I actually quite like it as a gray. And actually, in some of the writing, you do get more of that pencil texture. But yeah, that's kind of nice. It does go on, like when you're writing with it and it's fresh and still wet. It has a slightly purplish tint to it. But yeah, very well behaved, no bleed, no feather, no spread, no echo, no sheen. But yeah, look at this water test. You can make out every single little individual line. Again, this water test, very clear, very there. Did get a bit lighter, but really not much. Very recoverable. Now next up is Tomoe River paper, which is known for drawing out shading and sheen and dry times and echo. And since this ink can get pretty dark, and this paper is just ridiculously thin, that is probably going to be a bit of a problem most of the time. The thing is, not a whole lot, especially with that 0.6 stub, which is, you know, it's a smaller line and it's not as wet as the X450 generally is, so it's not putting down as much ink. Here in the bottom scrubby, you might be able to see a little bit of an echo, but again, that's because I was laying it on really thick to see if I would get some, like, actual sheen. I didn't, but I did get lots of the shine going on, which was fascinating. Now, this paper does draw out dry times, which it absolutely did, but not as much as I was anticipating. So that 0.6 stub took 16 seconds to dry. That broad and wet JinHao took 35. I was expecting something much, much worse, considering this is an Iron-Gall ink, Tomoe River, already a wet flowing, you know, I mean, look, it did go off the page, but it was dry in 35 seconds. Really not so bad. I do generally stop counting at 30, though. Now, I really hope you can see this. There's some really lovely shading in the writing, which is quite nice. But yeah, again, this is Tomoe River. You're not going to get bleed and feather and spread, which is nice. Now, this paper loves to let ink slide away when you add water, and that's kind of what happened. However, I feel like, again, I should point out that this writing had probably been on this paper maybe 20 minutes when I did this test. And I would like to remind you about the difference in the chromatography. If I'd given this a day, who knows what the results might have been. But again, we kind of get a pencil-y texture. It didn't dye the page, and actually it's still pretty there and pretty readable. If you had to recover that, I'd say you probably could. Now for the next 3 tests, I just used the 0.6 stub, except to write the name, so. This is the world's worst 20-pound copier paper. I have yet to encounter a paper that's worse than this, including those like really cheap, like little notepads that like sometimes you see. Like it, yeah, so there is something you're gonna see here. Now let's compare this line with this line. There is some spread, but not as much as we sometimes see. It could be a lot worse, but it is there, it is noticeable. And you still get a little bit of shading. If I bring this in, you can kind of see it. And honestly, I was expecting crazy feathers, but you're really not going to see much of any, which is nice. And that is something that Iron-Gall generally does very well. Generally, it plays very well with cheap paper. And except for the spread, I'd say that's what happened here. I mean, you do get a little bit of shading. You do not get feathering, which is something this paper just like lives for. You get quick dry times, and you get no bleed. None. Not even close. Not even the water test. You see where the paper buckled from the water test, but look at this. Even that X450. I mean, you can see it because of the light, but that's it. That is good. That's real good. And then let's check out this water test. Now, this is a more absorbent paper. More absorbent papers tend to draw the ink in, make it harder to wash out. And despite the fact that this had probably been on here to dry like maybe 15 minutes, look at how clear that is. I mean, it barely even blinked. Didn't feather, didn't explode, didn't start like seeping out the back. That is a very good water test. Now, next up is Mead Notebook Paper. It's very common for people, you know, still in school in the United States, at least. I don't know how common it is in like Canada, but anyways, this is the type that you would probably find in like a spiral notebook, like a 5-star. Not the kind you'd get in like a lab notebook. That stuff has more of a texture like newsprint. This is really feathery lately. Like freakishly so. However, bring this in. Yeah. No, not a lot of feathers. Oh, look at the top of the G in dogs. Oh no. Whatever shall we do? And again, like, look at the scrubby. We get a little bit of shading. We get a little bit of shading in the writing. 2.5 seconds to dry. Now, we do get a couple of feathers. Like, look at the. But, you know, like, okay. And then this is the X450. Really not bad. I mean, and then also, just to show you, there is much less spread. So this is the 20 pound right here. This is the Mead. Line width doesn't get nearly as broad. That's lovely. So lately this has been freaking out and feathering. Here, practically none at all. Nowhere near as much spread as a 20 pound copier paper. Not even the barest little hint of bleed. And bear in mind, this is thinner paper than 20 pound copier paper. If you need a permanent ink and you're still in high school and you have to use this crap because it is pretty cheap stuff, this ink might really work for you. And speaking of water tests, wow, look at that water test. This paper can make things just freak out when you add water. Look at this. You can see how much the paper buckled. That didn't blink. Totally there, totally readable, very nice. Now, lastly is Moleskine notebook paper, which I hate because it is my sworn nemesis, because it is cheap and yet expensive. And you can see the texture of the pulp most times, like the pulp they use to actually make the paper. And you kind of can in the scrubby and in the wettest parts of the writing, and like weirdly long dry times for what is obviously an absorbent paper. But honestly, considering how much this paper generally loves to feather, it could be a lot worse. You know, like, we're not seeing a ton of feathers. We are seeing some, but not a ton. You do retain shading on here, which is nice. And I say there's no bleed or no terrible bleed, which is essentially true. This is the X450. That's asking a lot of Moleskine. Don't even bother. And then here, right along the edge, there's maybe a little bit, and here, and that's pretty much about it, except until you get to the water test. Now, this paper really freaks out on the water test mostly, but here, not so much. It did freak out a little, I'm not gonna lie. But, I mean, that's recoverable. If you had to recover that, you could. Absolutely. Could be a heck of a lot worse. We've seen a lot worse. So, there you go. For your consideration, from Poland, K.W.Z's Iron-Gall Blue number 4. They've got a lot. It's gray. Gray with tiny hints of purple. Very well behaved. A little bit wet. Shades beautifully. Gets kind of shiny on the fancier papers. Excellent water resistance. Did really well on the cheap papers. For your consideration from the Triple N Network, if you liked the video, please give it a thumbs up. If you'd like to see more, please subscribe to the channel. And thanks for watching. Bye.